Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, hockey fans. It is a balmy 5 degrees Celsius, 42 degrees Fahrenheit in beautiful, overcast Bridgewater, Nova Scotia today. My name is Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, and welcome to the Monday, April 11th edition, the debut edition of the Bridgewater's Finest 2016 NHL Playoffs podcast. Now, obviously, this is a bit of a departure from what we have done in previous years. Before, obviously, on this channel, we'd be doing kind of a round-by-round sort of thing, locking the predictions in and waiting until the next round before speaking to each other again. And I've kind of been screwing the pooch the last little while in terms of content on my YouTube channel. So I thought, what better way to rectify that situation and give you the most content that I possibly can than by doing a podcast. I haven't done a podcast in a little while, so I thought, why not? This is going to be an interesting little experiment. I'm so excited to bring this project to you and to go through every single day of the NHL playoffs right along with you. So obviously that's what our format here is going to be. You're going to be getting content, a new episode every single day during the NHL playoffs, right up to the final game of the Stanley Cup Final. The format of each episode, kind of simple. We're going to be talking about the previous night's action. We're going to be teeing up today's games, talking about some major storylines from the previous day, giving you predictions, game-by-game predictions. But at the beginning of each round, like with today's episode, I'm going to give you a prediction for the series as a whole. And it's a good way to kind of, again, keep with it every single game as the series develop. Again, I'm really excited to do this. I'm not going to commit to a length of each episode. Most podcasts try to kind of shoot for an hour, but I think it would be a little arrogant of me to assume that you're going to want to listen to just my voice for an hour every single day. So if we go a half hour, we go a half hour. If we go 20 minutes, we go 20 minutes. If we go 45, we go 45. It's whatever happens. We're just going to kind of let it go. It's a bit more free form. It's allows for some more personal expression and some more commentary, which is nice. And again, it's just the most content that I can possibly bring to you, which I think is fantastic, given that there hasn't been a lot of content on this channel for a little while. So that ends today. Now, the matchups are all set for the first round of the 2016 Stanley Cup Playoffs. Now, before we get into those, I wanted to let you know I have set up an NHL.com bracket challenge for the 2016 playoffs, and that information to join that bracket challenge is going to be in the description of today's video, tomorrow's video, and Wednesday's video. You sign up an account with NHL.com, you join up, and you put your March Madness style NHL playoff predictions head-to-head against mine, as well as some of the other YouTube prognosticators, including Geo Knows, Hatbox, Billy B, Andrew Warren, and more. So again, that information is going to be in the description to today's video, tomorrow's video, as well as Wednesday's. The deadline to get your picks in is 6:59 p.m. Eastern Time on Wednesday. That is a minute before puck drop of the first game. Again, I can't believe the playoffs are here already. But you got to get your picks in by 6:59 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday. That is when the brackets lock. After that, you're shit out of luck. But join and put your picks head-to-head against mine. Okay, kids, it's finally here. This is amazing. The 2016 NHL playoffs, they're finally here. We got some really excellent matchups in the Eastern and Western conferences. I've been seeing a lot of people online, though, talking about the way they do the playoff format now and how it seems to lead to, it's just the same teams playing each other every year. I mean, no 2 years are the same. You know what I mean? It might be the same teams and it might be the relatively same rosters, but no 2 seasons are the same. There's always injury problems. There's always different contexts heading into different series. So, I mean, honestly, I don't mind the playoff format the way the NHL does it right now. What do you guys think? Is the NHL format for the playoffs, is it a problem for you? Would you like to see them go back to the old way? Would you like to see them do it some other way entirely? Have your say. What do you guys think of the way the NHL does the format for the playoffs? In any case, we've got some really interesting matchups here. We're going to start in the Eastern Conference, as always. The Metropolitan Division champion Washington Capitals, President's Trophy winning Washington Capitals, are going to be taking on the second wildcard team in the East, the Philadelphia Flyers, who just snuck in under the bar with 2 days left in the season. Awesome for Philly's fan base. That's going to be an interesting series. The number 2 and number 3 teams in the Metropolitan Division, the Pittsburgh Penguins, will have home ice advantage over the New York Rangers. Third year in a row that these two teams have met. New York has won the last 2 matchups. Pittsburgh's got revenge on their mind for sure. The surprise Atlantic Division champion Florida Panthers taking on the top wildcard team in the Eastern Conference, the New York Islanders. Great season for Florida. Huge bounce-back season for Roberto Luongo. Couldn't have happened to what seems to be a nicer guy. Florida wins the Atlantic Division. They draw the Islanders in the first round. And the other 2 Atlantic Division teams, the Tampa Bay Lightning, will have home ice advantage against the Detroit Red Wings, making the playoffs for the 25th consecutive season. We're going to pop over to the Western Conference now. The Central Division champion Dallas Stars going to be taking on the second wildcard team in the West, the Minnesota Wild, the battle of former and current Minnesota-based NHL franchises. Dallas dominated that season series there, by the way, but we're going to talk about that in a little bit. And the other 2 Central Division teams, the St. Louis Blues, will have home ice advantage over the Chicago Blackhawks, defending Stanley Cup champion Chicago Blackhawks. The Pacific Division Championship, that came down to the last day of the season. The Anaheim Ducks take it. They win the Pacific. They draw the top wildcard team, the Nashville Predators. And the other 2 Pacific Division teams, the Los Angeles Kings, will have home ice advantage as they take on the San Jose Sharks. So those are your first round matchups, and I thought a nice way to kind of kick it off would be to talk about what I'm surprised about. Like, who am I surprised got in or got in where they got in, and who I'm surprised is not there. Now, obviously, we're going to be talking about the fact that no Canadian team made the playoffs, but let's talk about who I'm surprised that they made it. Who surprised me the most that they are in the playoffs and possibly where they're at. I mean, Philly, obviously. Philly is the big one because it looked, with a couple of weeks to go, like Boston almost had one of these wild card spots wrapped up. They might have even had one of the Atlantic Division slots wrapped up, and it felt like you look at Boston and Boston just feels like a playoff team, you know what I mean? And I mean, honestly, they just fell apart. I mean, to lose 6-1, no disrespect to the Senators whatsoever, but to lose 6-1 and really not even show up when your playoff lives are on the line. I think that right there, that's the death bell for Claude Julien. I would be shocked to see Claude Julien back behind the bench of Boston again for another season. I know they didn't have Tuukka Rask, but Tuukka Rask's only one player, and Boston, you got to show up. And Boston did not show up. Ottawa gets to end the season on a high note with a win, and Boston goes home. I mean, and that's just it. And they handed Philadelphia 2 chances to get 2 points and overtake them, and Philly only needed 1. They won their game, and Philadelphia going to the playoffs. Florida winning the Atlantic Division. You look at Florida, and I'm like, I'm not 100% sure that this is even a playoff team, much less a division winner, but as I mentioned before, Roberto Luongo, just what a season for this guy, and proving why seems like he's still got plenty in the tank. And Florida is kind of an interesting matchup there for anybody in the Eastern Conference. Not saying that they can beat anybody in the East, but they're an interesting matchup. They're going to be a tough out, especially if Luongo plays up to form like he did for really the entire season. Florida's just one of those interesting teams. They got contributions from their young guys. They got, obviously, Jágr, like the ageless wonder, the absolute gangster that Jaromir Jágr is, just kind of keeps going. I would love to see this guy play until 50. He said maybe I will play until I'm 50. I would love to friggin' see that 50-year-old Jágr probably still putting up 50 or 60 points. That would be super, super fun to watch. Detroit is a bit of a surprise for me. I mean, obviously it shouldn't be a surprise. They've made it the last 24 friggin' seasons, but they were a bit of a surprise for me to make it this year because really it looked like Boston had the inside track, and once again, that just didn't work out for them. And I guess Minnesota, if I had to pick another team that I can say, wow, I'm surprised they made it, it would be Minnesota. Moreover, to the point about Detroit, and this leads into Minnesota, which is why I'm saying it. I mean, Detroit's top scorer this year was Zetterberg. He only had 50 points. So Detroit not generating a ton of offense there. As a matter of fact, they ranked number 23 in the league in terms of goals per game this year. I mean, Zetterberg, again, top scorer at only 50 points. And that leads into Minnesota, because Minnesota's top scorer was Mikko Koivu, 56 points. So, I mean, your top scorer is not even hitting a 60-point plateau. Minnesota somehow was still the number 18 offensive team in the league this year at 2.6 goals per game. So the scoring was a little more balanced, but they don't have that one elite type scorer, you know what I mean? So Minnesota, it was a bit of a surprise to me that they made it. I mean, they're a top 10 defensive team, and Devin Dubnyk, it like the curious case of Devin Dubnyk, because here's a guy that couldn't seem to cut it in Edmonton, and it's a perfect example of it really is a lot about the team that's in front of you. He gets traded around a little bit. He gets traded to Montreal for literally nothing. Like, Montreal, this is one of the smartest trades I feel like I've ever seen, even though they ultimately ended up doing nothing with it. But it was such a smart trade to me because it was literally trading nothing for something. And I feel like anytime you can do that, I think Dubnyk was just traded for future considerations, which is basically nothing. You can consider plenty, but you can still say no. So the fact that Montreal traded for him for nothing, I thought was genius. Now, obviously, it didn't pan out, and he got sent off again later. But, you know, such an interesting kind of case. And then he ends up in Minnesota, and, you know, I'll be damned. I mean, Dubnyk has played, I feel, far above his ability. And that's no disrespect to him at all, but I look at the results, I look at the numbers, and I feel like this guy's playing well above his ability. And at some point, I feel like this is going to come crashing back down to earth. But, I mean, it's been a few seasons now, so clearly if it's going to happen, it ain't happened yet. Okay, so those are the teams that kind of surprised me that they've made the playoffs. Now let's talk about who didn't. Obviously, the big shock for me and the big homer issue for me is the fact that Montreal didn't make it. I mean, moreover to the fact that no Canadian team made it, like, Montreal not making the playoffs to me is shocking. And it's more than Carey Price. It's more than just the fact that they started the season 9-0, became the first team in NHL history to do so and have all 9 wins be in regulation. But it was more than the Price injury. It's the way Montreal plays in front of any goaltender who is not Carey Price. Because when Carey is in there, Montreal, I mean, I've watched this team play for years. Montreal plays much less predictably when Carey Price is in front of them. And it's not just about his ability and his results. It's about the confidence that a team can step on the ice and know, hey, I can pinch here. I can take a chance because even if I give up a 2-on-1 the other way, I got Carey Price back there. I got the best goaltender in the world, arguably. Although Carey even said he feels Braden Holtby's the best goaltender in the world, which I think is very high praise. But you play completely differently in front of Carey Price, or certainly the Habs did, than they did in front of anybody else. And when there's anybody else back there, Montreal is such a predictable team. And that's what happened this year. Montreal became one of the easiest teams in the league to play against. Because, yeah, they're talented, but you know what they're going to do. Perfect example. I'm watching a game, I think it was Montreal and Edmonton. I think it was February 6th. It was Montreal versus Edmonton. And I'm sitting there, and I'm watching the Habs in the offensive zone, and I'm calling spots. I'm saying, okay, he's going to put it back to the point. It's going to go cross point. They're going to go cross ice. They're going to try for a one-timer. And it's not just the fact that I've been watching hockey for a long time. It's that I know what they're going to do. And if I know what they're going to do, the other team knows what they're going to do. And that's a problem. You don't necessarily see that when Carey Price is back there. They can play more unpredictably. They can kind of get outside of the system a little bit and try things because they have the confidence of playing in front of a guy like Carey Price. Boston, we talked about, is another big shock that they didn't make it because they looked like they had it wrapped up. Colorado, to me, is a surprise that they're not in the playoffs. This is a very Jekyll and Hyde team, maybe the most Jekyll and Hyde team in the entire league, that they can play elite division-winning hockey, or they can play nothing. You know what I mean? They can play virtually nothing hockey, and the team looks so talented, and they've got so many good pieces, and I honestly feel like Patrick Waugh is a good to decent coach. For some reason, they just couldn't put it together this year, and that was a bit of a surprise to me. And the Vancouver Canucks. Again, we're going to talk about the whole Canadian teams thing here in a second, but Vancouver, what really stands out to me is Vancouver had the league's worst goal differential this year at minus 52. Wow. Like, you think about the bad teams that are in this league, and their goal differential was not as bad as the Vancouver Canucks. And that's unacceptable. That is almost rebuild territory. Like, and I know the R word can be kind of wonky unless you're a Maple Leafs fan, which we're going to talk about that in a minute too. But I mean, is it time to rebuild the Canucks? It could very well be, because I mean, you have a fan base that has much higher expectations than that. And I mean, what was it, 2011? Was it that this team was in the Stanley Cup final? 4 to 5 years later, they have the worst goal differential in the league. Like, that's unacceptable. So there are some changes that need to happen, I think, in Vancouver. Everybody's talking about changes in Ottawa, which have already begun, but it looks like a big change could be and should be incoming for the Vancouver Canucks. Okay, let's address the elephant in the room before we get into making the actual predictions for the first round of the playoffs. We got a bunch of other quick hit things that we're going to talk about, but I think I'm going to save all of those for tomorrow's episode. We don't have any games today or tomorrow, so we're going to need something to talk about tomorrow, so I'll leave those for tomorrow's episode. No Canadian team made the NHL playoffs for the first time since 1970. That is shocking. That is depressing as a Canadian hockey fan. It does not, however, harm my potential enjoyment for watching the playoffs. That was one thing that really bugged me. There's all this rhetoric in sports media, and I have a real love-hate relationship with sports media, as I'm sure you're going to find out through the duration of this podcast. There was all this rhetoric in sports media in Canada and in the US, like, oh geez, there's no Canadian teams. I guess Canadians won't be watching the playoffs this year. And I just did a whole gee golly shucks arm movement there that you couldn't see because this is, in fact, an audio recording. But I just find that so frustrating to hear something like that, because it's like, to me, it's the equivalent of internet clickbait. It's like, no, that's not a thing. Like, that's not true. You know that's not going to be the case. I sat down and I went through the rosters for the teams that did make the playoffs. In this first round, we're going to be seeing anywhere between 190 to 200 Canadian-born NHL players on the 16 teams that made the playoffs. So we're talking better than 10 per team. We're looking at right around half of each roster being Canadian. I think the fewest number of Canadians on one team was either 7 or 8. Canadians are going to be watching the playoffs. Like, this is our sport. This is no disrespect to any other hockey-playing nation in the world. But the NHL, as it is, would not exist without Canada. It would not exist without Canadian hockey, without the standard that Canadian hockey set in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s and today. The NHL would not exist without Canadian hockey. That's not to pat us on the back. That's just calling a spade a spade. So guess what? Yeah, Canadians are going to watch the playoffs, guys. You don't have to worry. But something that's a little more shocking and surprising and depressing to me than the fact that no Canadian team made the playoffs is no Canadian team scored more goals than they gave up this year. That's a more frustrating statistic to me than anything. Ottawa and Montreal led the way in goal differential this year. Ottawa at -11, Montreal at -15. And keep in mind, both of those teams won their last game of the season by a minimum of 3 goals. So before that last game, those numbers were even worse. That, to me, is a lot more depressing than the fact that none of those teams made the playoffs. Like, you got to at least score more goals than you give up. That's just, if you don't do that, you failed as a hockey team. And there are a team, maybe even 2, that made the playoffs, and that was the case. But you can't. Like, you can't. You failed if you're giving up more goals than you've scored. No Canadian team scored more than they gave up. So to me, that's really depressing. Okay, folks, enough of my rambling, enough of the garbage. Let's get into it. Let's get into why you are here. Eastern and Western Conference first round playoff predictions, analysis. Let's do this. We're going to start in the Eastern Conference with that first matchup we talked about, the Metropolitan Division champion, President's Trophy winning Washington Capitals taking on the Philadelphia Flyers. Season series here, Washington was 2-0-2 against Philly in their 4 games. Washington outscored Philadelphia 12-9 in those games. Washington boasts both the number 2 offense and number 2 defense in hockey this year. They scored 3.02 goals per game and only gave up 2.33. Obviously a great season for Braden Holtby. Philly's offense had trouble this year. They were only the 22nd ranked offense, 2.57 goals per game. They did clock in number 12 defensively at 2.56. So they actually only scored 0.01 more goals per game than they gave up. So they were very close to that sort of bubble line of that I just talked about and I just yelled at you about. In terms of special teams, Washington's a top 5 special team unit this season. They got the number 5 ranked power play. They got the number 3 ranked penalty kill. When it comes to special teams, they can be a big difference maker. Philly almost had a top 10 power play this year. They were ranked number 11. They're only the 20th ranked penalty kill. So if they get into penalty trouble, there's going to be a lot of trouble against Washington and against that very effective power play. Kuznetsov led the way in scoring for Washington this year. You thought I was going to say Ovechkin. It was Kuznetsov. 20 goals, 57 assists for 77 points. Claude Giroux was a leading scorer for Philly. 22 goals, 45 assists for 67 points. Take a look at the goaltending between the two teams. You're looking at Braden Holtby. You're looking at Steve Mason. The obvious edge there goes to Braden Holtby. Again, Carey Price said he's arguably the best goaltender in the world right now. I really like Braden Holtby. I think he is the kind of goaltender that can take a team a long way in a playoff. You lean on him. He's your bell cow, to steal a term from football. He's the guy that can take you really far. Goaltending edge definitely goes to the Capitals. Notable injuries on each side. Nicholas Backstrom is currently day-to-day for Washington with an upper body injury. I don't think that's super significant. I figure he will be back. For Philadelphia, Michael Del Zotto is on the injured reserve. He has still got a wrist injury here. I think Philadelphia is going to give Washington a run for their money. I think Philadelphia is a physical enough team that they can do some damage against Washington. I don't think Philly beats Washington in a best-of-7 series, especially where Washington's got home ice. I like the Capitals to win this series. I think Washington beats Philadelphia in 6 games. I think they win the series on Philly's ice. So Washington, Philadelphia, take the Capitals in 6. Let's take a look at that other Metropolitan Division matchup. The Pittsburgh Penguins, the number 2 team in that division, taking on the New York Rangers. Pittsburgh kind of dominated the season series in terms of wins. They won 3 of the 4 games, but they only outscored the Rangers 12-9, which indicates to me very close games. Pittsburgh had the number 3 ranked offense in hockey this year, 2.94 goals per game. They also had a top 10 defense, ranking in at number 6, 2.43 goals allowed. The Rangers also had a top 10 offense this year. The Rangers kind of flipped the script on the way they've been the last few years, where they leaned very heavily on Lundqvist and their defense. Actually, the Rangers had a top 10 offense this year at 2.84 goals per game, but they only ranked middle of the pack defensively. Number 15, 2.62 goals allowed per game. That is higher than they are used to. Lundqvist kind of had a down season this year, and especially has struggled as of late. That could be a big problem. Special teams, neither of these two teams had a particularly good power play this year. The Rangers ranked at 14th and the Penguins ranked at 16th. The big difference in special teams, Pittsburgh had a very, very good penalty kill this year. Top 5 in the league, right there at number 5. The Rangers' penalty kill was abysmal this year. They ranked at number 26. Really not good. And that could be a problem if they can't figure out how to kill off penalties and they get into a little bit of penalty trouble, which I assume is going to happen in this series. There's bad blood between these two teams from the last 2 playoff series. There's going to be penalties. There's going to be opportunities. The Rangers better figure out how to kill a friggin' penalty. Top scorer for the Penguins, obviously you know who I'm going to say, Sidney Crosby. 36 goals, 49 helpers, 85 points this year. Really turned it on the second half of the season. Matt Zuccarello led the way for the Rangers, just barely hitting that 60-point plateau. 26 goals, 35 helpers for 61 points. Goaltending is going to be kind of the story of this series, I think. And if you look at who's got the edge in terms of goaltending, it kind of depends on who plays. I mean, Marc-Andre Fleury has got an injury issue here, a concussion issue. The Penguins are calling it day-to-day, but how in the world can you be day-to-day with a concussion with everything that we know about concussions? So if Marc-Andre Fleury plays in this series, I'm giving the goaltending edge to Pittsburgh because Lundqvist has really, really struggled lately. If it's not Fleury, if it's Matt Murphy, who now also has his own kind of injury issues, or certainly if it's, I think, Zatkov is their third goaltender, if it's either of those two, the easy goaltending edge, the clear goaltending edge goes to the Rangers because he's still Henrik Lundqvist. He's struggled this year, but he's still King Henrik. So if Fleury is in there, I give the slight edge to Pittsburgh. If not, it's a definite advantage for the New York Rangers. Notable injuries between these two teams, there are a ton of them. Matt Zuccarello, day-to-day with a lower body injury for the Rangers. Ryan McDonough, day-to-day with a hand injury. Eric Stahl, day-to-day with an upper body injury that looked like a very similar injury that PK Subban suffered earlier this season. Anton Strahlberg, defenseman for the Rangers, is also day-to-day with a lower body. Dan Girardi is day-to-day with an upper body injury. There are a lot of injuries on New York's side. And there's a lot of injuries on Pittsburgh's side, too. Evgeny Malkin is still on the injured reserve with an upper body injury. Marc-Andre Fleury, as we mentioned earlier, day-to-day with a concussion, but how can you possibly be? Matt Murray, day-to-day with a head injury. Pittsburgh Oli Mata on the back end, day-to-day with a lower body. And Bo Bennett is also day-to-day with an undisclosed injury. So there are a number of injuries on both sides here, and that could very well play a factor in this series. As far as a prediction goes, Pittsburgh and the Rangers, I like Pittsburgh here. I think this is going to be a ridiculously well-played series on both sides. It's going to be physical. It's going to be angry. There is bad blood between these two teams. And especially with all the injuries on both sides, I just like Pittsburgh here. I think Pittsburgh has played tremendously well, and especially if Marc-Andre Fleury plays up to his potential. Not necessarily playoff Fleury, but Fleury. I mean, he's one of the better goaltenders in the league. I think Pittsburgh has what it takes to beat the Rangers here. I'm going to take Pittsburgh in a full 7-game series. Penguins-Rangers, take the Penguins in 7. Let's move to the Atlantic Division champion Florida Panthers taking on the top wildcard team in the Eastern Conference, the New York Islanders. Season series here was 2-1 Florida. They outscored the Islanders 9-6 in those 3 games. Florida was top 10 in terms of offense and defense this year, 2.83 goals scored per game versus 2.44 allowed per game. Again, a very good season from Roberto Luongo. The Islanders ranked just outside the top 10 in both of those same categories. Number 11 offensively at 2.77 goals per game. Number 13 defensively at 2.57 goals allowed per game. Special teams, Florida, despite the fact that they won a division, they certainly didn't do it on their special teams. Florida, the number 23 ranked power play and the number 24 ranked penalty kill. That is not good enough. Certainly not this time of year, I wouldn't think. The Islanders didn't have a great power play this year either. They were only 17th, but they were a top 5 team on the penalty kill, ranking in at number 4 on the season. So if they get into penalty trouble, it's nice to know that they can lean on a very good penalty kill and some pretty good goaltending. Top scorer for the Panthers, you know who I'm going to say, the ageless wonder, Jaromir Jagr, still tagging 18-year-old models. 27 goals, 39 assists for 66 points. John Tavares obviously led the way for the Islanders this year. 33 goals, topping 30 goals again. 37 assists for 70 points. Taking a look at the goaltending between these two teams, I'm going to give the goaltending edge to Florida. As I said, Luongo had a quite good season this year. And, there are question marks with the Islanders, especially with Jaroslav Halak, who is still nursing a groin injury. Those can be really, really tricky for goaltenders. So will Halak play? Will he not play? I think that could very well be a deciding factor in this series. I'm going to give the goaltending edge here to Florida. If Luongo stays healthy, Luongo's the guy, and Luongo can win a series or two here for the Panthers. Notable injuries on Florida's side. Eric Goodbranson is day-to-day with a concussion. As I mentioned with Marc-Andre Fleury, how can you possibly be day-to-day with a concussion? One of Florida's young stars there too, Trocheck, is also day-to-day with a foot injury. For the Islanders, Jaroslav Halak, as I just mentioned, day-to-day with a groin. Kyle Okposo, for personal reasons, left the team. He is considered day-to-day. Anders Lee is officially listed as day-to-day, but really is out indefinitely. He's got a broken fibula. I would be very surprised if Anders Lee plays in this series. Maybe he will, but it seems like for the benefit of the player, might not be the best idea. Travis Hamonic is also still day-to-day for the Islanders with a lower body injury. While I do expect guys like Hamonic and Okposo, and maybe even Jaroslav Halak to be ready to play in this series, I like the Panthers here. I got a feeling about this Panthers team. Certainly in this first round matchup here, I like the Islanders. I think the Islanders are a good team. That penalty kill can take them a long way. John Tavares is an elite player in this league. They've got good goaltending, but I worry about them kind of getting under the bright lights here. And Luongo is a guy who has done it before. He knows how to win, and he's had success at multiple levels. I like Luongo here. I'm going to take the goaltending, and I'm going to take the Panthers to beat the Islanders. I like the Panthers in 6. And the final Eastern Conference matchup to talk about in the first round, the Atlantic Division matchup of the Tampa Bay Lightning hosting the Detroit Red Wings. Again, made the playoffs for the 25th consecutive year. Season series was tied at 2 games apiece. Tampa Bay was 2-2 in those games. They did outscore Detroit in those 4 games 11-8. Offensively, Tampa Bay had a little bit of a down season comparative to what they have done in the past. Number 12 in the league, 2.73 goals scored per game. Detroit ranked only number 23 in that area, 2.55 goals per game. And Detroit, we're talking about one of those teams that gave up more goals than they scored this year. Detroit ranked number 17 defensively, but it's 2.67 goals per game. That's a full 10th of a goal per game less than they score. And Tampa Bay was a top 5 defensive team this year, any way you slice it, ranking number 5 in the league, 2.41 goals allowed per game. Detroit could have trouble lighting the lamp. Special teams, the Lightning really struggled on the power play this season. They were actually the worst power play of the playoff-eligible teams at number 28 out of 30 this year. Yikes, number 28 power play. But they were top 10 on the penalty kill at number 7. Detroit kind of in the middle of the pack in both areas on special teams. Number 13 on the power play, number 14 on the kill. Nikita Kucherov, a bit of a surprise, leading the way for the Lightning in scoring this year. 30 goals, 36 assists for 66 points. As we mentioned earlier, Henrik Zetterberg led the way for the Red Wings, but only put up 50 points, 13 goals, 37 assists. This is a team that struggled offensively this year. The goaltending edge, I definitely give it to Tampa Bay. Ben Bishop is a really good goaltender, and Tampa Bay has done a really good job of developing the goaltenders behind Ben Bishop. So even if Bishop gets hurt, you've got Vasilevsky who can step in, and their third goaltender, I can't remember his name right now, Gudlevsky, I believe, or something. I can't remember the name right now, but he actually led that team in save percentage this year. So they've got good goaltenders behind Ben Bishop, but even if it is only Bishop, I like Bishop here over either Peter Mrazek or Jimmy Howard, whoever Detroit chooses to play. But I give a definite goaltending edge here to the Tampa Bay Lightning. But Here's the big thing about this series. I would be shocked if Steven Stamkos plays in this playoff at all, much less in this first round. He's officially listed as day-to-day on the injury report, but when he first ran into this blood clot issue that he has, his original prognosis was 1 to 3 months. Also, Tampa Bay is really down with injuries right now. Victor Hedman's day-to-day with an upper body injury. Kucherov is day-to-day with an undisclosed injury. Callahan is day-to-day with a lower body injury. And then Anton Stralman, who is another one of those ones, like Anders Lee in New York, who's officially listed as day-to-day, but probably out indefinitely. He's got a fractured fibula. These two players, Anders Lee and Anton Stralman, for the benefit of those two players, probably should not play. Got to let those things heal before they become chronic problems. That's just my opinion, but we'll see what they choose to do. On Detroit's side, they've pretty much got a clean slate in terms of injuries. Johan Franzen is on the injured reserve with concussion-like symptoms. But other than that, they've pretty much got a clean slate. They're pretty much at 100% capacity. And I think that's going to be the difference. If this is the upset, let it be the upset. I like the Red Wings to beat Tampa Bay. I like it to happen in 7 games. It's going to go a full series on Tampa Bay's home ice, no less. I like the Red Wings to come up huge and upset the Lightning in the first round. Take the Red Wings in 7 games. Let's move over to the Western Conference now, where we look at the Central Division champion Dallas Stars, the best record in the Western Conference, taking on the bottom wildcard team, the Minnesota Wild. Again, as I mentioned earlier, Dallas dominated this season series, winning 4 of the 5 games. They outscored Minnesota in those games, really only by kind of a close margin, 18-13, but they did win 4 of the 5 games. Dallas was the number 1 offensive team in hockey this year, 3.23 goals scored per game. Now, Minnesota was a top 10 defensive team at only 2.49 allowed, but again, you are facing the top offense in hockey. Defensively, Dallas, not the greatest, actually number 19 in the league, 2.78 goals allowed per game. That is a problem. Whereas Minnesota's offense, they're only at about 2.6 goals per game. They're kind of ranked in the bottom half of the league, too, at number 18. In terms of special teams, Dallas was a top 5 power play this year, ranking in at number 4 in the league. They were also a top 10 penalty kill. They were right there at number 10, but hey, 10 is still top 10. Minnesota struggled on special teams this year. They had the 15th ranked power play, which again is not bad, but they had the number 27 ranked penalty kill, which is the worst penalty kill among playoff teams. So if Minnesota gets into a bit of a dogfight here with Dallas, takes a couple of penalties, Dallas can put up goals very, very quickly. Minnesota's going to have to play disciplined to have any shot in this series at all. Top scorer for Dallas, of course, Jamie Benn, 41 goals, 48 assists, 89 points on the season. A huge season for Jamie Benn. Mikko Koivu, actually surprisingly, as I mentioned earlier, leading the way for Minnesota, 17 goals, 39 assists for 56 points. If we're looking at the goaltending between these two teams, I'm actually going to, I'm going to do Devan Dubnyk a solid here, because over the last couple of seasons, I've been really critical of him and saying, he's playing above his talent and blah, 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 blah. I'm going to give a very minuscule, slight goaltending edge here to Minnesota and Devan Dubnyk, because, my God, the dude plays up. He plays up to his opponents. He plays up to his competition. And, I've seen a lot of struggles out of Dallas's net this year. And kind of traditionally, it's a good thing that they can score those 3.23 per game, because sometimes they're giving up 3 and they need that little extra push. So I'm actually going to give the goaltending edge here to Minnesota. And if they can keep these close scoring games, I'd rather have Dubnyk. Only one real notable injury on Dallas' side of the puck, which is Tyler Seguin, still dealing with that Achilles injury. Right now he's listed as day-to-day. I would be surprised if he wasn't back in there by at least game 2. Maybe he sits out game 1, but I figure by game 2, Dallas is going to have Seguin back in there, which is good. He was their number 2 scorer this year. On Minnesota's side, Zach Parise and Thomas Vanek are both day-to-day with undisclosed injuries. So we're not 100% sure what's going on there, kind of shrouded in mystery as playoff teams are ought to do at this time of year. But Vanek and Parise still day-to-day, not sure whether they're going to be ready for Game 1 or not. Honestly, I think this series is Dallas all day. I will give Minnesota the benefit of the doubt and say that Minnesota will probably win one of the two games on their home ice. I think it comes back to Dallas in Game 5, and Dallas gets the win. So Dallas, Minnesota, take the Stars in 5. Let's take a look at that other Central Division matchup here. The St. Louis Blues hosting the Chicago Blackhawks for home ice. Chicago was actually 2-1-2 against St. Louis this year, outscoring St. Louis 14-12. So yeah, technically St. Louis did win 3 of those 5 games. Chicago picking up points in 4 out of 5, but Chicago did outscore them 14-12. Offensively, St. Louis kind of middle of the pack here, 15th in the league, 2.67 goals per game, versus Chicago's actually top 10 offense, looking at 2.85 goals scored per game. So that is going to be a bit of an interesting matchup there. But Chicago's going to have to deal with St. Louis's top 5 defense, 2.43 goals allowed per game for the Blues. Chicago was no slouch here. They were ranked number 11 defensively, 2.52 goals allowed per game. On special teams, St. Louis is a very good special teams unit this year, ranking with the number 6 power play and the number 3 penalty kill. But Chicago, second best power play in the league this year, but they were only number 22 on the penalty kill. So Chicago, kind of like Minnesota, if they want to stay in this series, they got to be disciplined. They cannot take bad penalties. St. Louis's power play is too good and their penalty kill is too poor for Chicago to be taking dumb penalties. They are going to need to play very disciplined hockey. Tarasenko, the Tarasen show, if you will, led the way in scoring, obviously, for St. Louis this year. 40-goal plateau for Tarasenko, 34 helpers for 74 points. And obviously, you don't need me to tell you who led scoring for Chicago this year. Patrick Kane, 46 goals, 60 helpers, 106 points. The only man to hit the 100-point plateau this season. Kane getting it done for the Blackhawks, especially after the offseason that he had. The goaltending between these two teams, I'm actually going to give it a push. I didn't want to... I feel like I would be disrespecting Corey Crawford if I gave St. Louis the edge here, because, I mean, this is a guy that's won multiple Stanley Cups. But I also felt like I'd be doing a disservice to St. Louis if I just gave it to Corey Crawford because Corey Crawford is Corey Crawford. So, honestly, it's a push to me, especially if Jake Allen misses any time, because it feels like Jake Allen is this team's goaltender of the now. He's not the future goaltender anymore. He's the goaltender of the now. No disrespect to Brian Elliott at all. But with Jake Allen's injury issue, and it's a lower body injury, you never want to muck with those when you're talking about goaltenders. But I have to give it a push because Corey Crawford's more than capable, but those two goaltenders for St. Louis did such a great job this year that it's hard not to go with them either. So I'm going to call it a push. I think this is going to be a series with some great goaltending. Notable injuries on St. Louis' side of the puck. Obviously, Jake Allen, as I mentioned, day-to-day with a lower body injury. Same deal for David Backes for St. Louis. Artem Anisimov for Chicago is day-to-day with an upper body injury, which is the same for Andrew Shaw for Chicago, also an upper body injury. Marian Hossa still listed as day-to-day, him with a lower body injury. This, I think, might be the series to watch in the first round. I think this is going to be exciting, great goaltending, tight games. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. I like the experience of the Blackhawks, so I'm going to take Chicago to win this series, but I think this thing is going the distance. I just like Chicago's pedigree. St. Louis, Chicago take the Blackhawks in 7. The Pacific Division champion Anaheim Ducks are going to be playing host to the top wildcard team in the Western Conference, the Nashville Predators. Season series, Nashville actually won 2 of the 3 games against Anaheim this year. Nashville may be one of those teams that Anaheim really didn't want to face in the first round. Nashville outscoring Anaheim in those 3 games 10-7. Offensively, Anaheim, I mean, they were okay. They were number 17 team, 2.62 goals scored per game. They weren't great, obviously. Nashville with the number 13 ranked offense, so better offensively, 2.73. Where Anaheim made that back is by being not only the best defensive team in hockey this year, but the best special teams unit in hockey this year, with the number 1 ranked power play and the number 1 ranked penalty kill. Unbelievable for Anaheim this year. 2.29 goals allowed per game, where Nashville ended just inside the top half of the league at 2.6 goals allowed per game. As I just mentioned, Anaheim, top special teams unit in hockey this year, number 1 power play, number 1 penalty kill. Nashville was just inside the top 10 in terms of their power play, ranked at number 10. They were just right in the middle of the pack, too, on the penalty kill at number 16. But against the top power play in the league, another one of these situations for Nashville, have to play disciplined hockey. Power plays and bad penalties could decide, could decide every series, but could really decide every series in the Western Conference. Top scorer for Anaheim, Ryan Getzlaf, chipping in 63 points on 13 goals and 50 helpers. Philip Forsberg leading the way for Nashville, 33 goals, 31 helpers for 64 points. The goaltending edge in this series, kind of like the last series, I have to give it a push. And that may seem stupid given that I'm talking about the best defensive team in hockey, but and no disrespect to the combination of John Gibson and Frederick Anderson. They're 2 phenomenal goaltenders, and they played really, really well this year. And they had a fantastic defensive unit in front of them. But I look at Nashville's side of the ice, and I see Pekka Rinne, and I know how good Pekka Rinne is. I've seen him be unbelievable, almost world-beating, almost unbeatable. And if that Pekka Rinne shows up, it's going to be really hard to beat Nashville in any 7-game series or in any individual game. So I have to push the goaltending matchup here just because I know how unbelievable Pekka Rinne can be. Notable injuries in this series. Actually, John Gibson currently dealing with a lower body injury. He's day-to-day in the crease for Anaheim. Ditto for Ryan Kessler, lower body injury. He's day-to-day. And Kevin Bieksa with an upper body injury is day-to-day. Nashville's injury report is clean. There is no one listed on Nashville's injury report right now, and that is a big deal for the Predators. That's going to help them a big time in this series that I ultimately think the Ducks will win in 6. Anaheim's just unbelievable. On the defensive side of the puck, they're counterpunchers. Like, Anaheim had such a great season this year, and I can't wait to see who they're going to meet in the second round. I really like Nashville. If Pekka Rinne shows up, he could be near unbeatable, but ultimately, as a whole team series, I like the Ducks here. Anaheim, Nashville take the Ducks in 6. And in the final Western Conference playoff matchup, the number 2 and number 3 teams in the Pacific Division, we've got Los Angeles playing host to the San Jose Sharks. Season series, San Jose was 2-1-1 against Los Angeles this year. They played them very well. Only outscored them 13-11. That tells me very close, very low scoring games. In terms of offense, this was an LA Kings season, man. Middle of the pack offensively, number 14, 2.72 goals scored per game, but a top 5 defensive and goaltending season one more time for the LA Kings. Number 3 ranked defensively, only giving up 2.34 goals per game. San Jose was a top 5 offense this year, though, 2.89 goals scored per game, and did just hang on to the top 10 defensively as well, only giving up 2.52. This is going to be a very interesting and a very fun series to see just whose defense breaks first. In terms of special teams, both of these teams had a top 10 power play this year. San Jose, number 3 ranked on the power play, with the Kings clocking in at number 8. If there's a difference between these two in terms of special teams, it may very well be on the penalty kill. The Kings, the number 15 penalty kill team in the league, but San Jose only 21st. So San Jose's got some issues killing penalties. If the Kings can force them into a couple of bad situations, take a couple of bad penalties, the Kings could definitely capitalize. Anze Kopitar led the way in scoring for the Kings this year. 25 goals, 49 assists for 74 points. And man, Jumbo Joe Thornton, front row Joe, 19 goals, 63 assists, another 80-point season for Thornton. This dude is not slowing down. He led the way for the Sharks. In terms of goaltending, I mean, you got to give the edge to the Kings. Jonathan Quick has won 2 Stanley Cups. He's unbelievable, and it's right around this time every year where he's just like, okay, time to go Super Saiyan, time to become unbeatable Jonathan Quick. He always does that this time of the year. I have to give the goaltending edge here to the Kings and Jonathan Quick. Notable injuries on the Kings side of the puck. Marian Gaborik still sitting on the injured reserve with a knee injury. Alex Martinez for the Kings, who scored the Stanley Cup winning goal just a couple of years back. He's day-to-day with an undisclosed injury. For San Jose, we've got Marc-Edouard Vlasic as well as Matt Nieto, who are both day-to-day with undisclosed injuries. This is going to be a fun series because I think San Jose has the offense to beat this team, but I don't think they will. And, I don't know if this is like a Vancouver situation where like San Jose's window is closing so quickly and like they really feel like this is the year that they've got the team to do it and that like they're going to go sort of deep into the playoffs. This is the worst possible draw for them. I would be happier if I was San Jose. I would almost rather have played Anaheim, to be perfectly honest. I don't think San Jose is going to get over on LA. I just don't see it. I like LA to go to the second round here. Los Angeles, San Jose, take the Kings in 6. Whew, what a day. Well, there's the first episode, folks. We're going to go over the round 1 predictions right here at the end for you. Just to recap, in the Eastern Conference, I like Washington to beat Philly in 6 games. I like Pittsburgh to beat the Rangers in a full 7-game series. I like the Panthers to beat the Islanders in 6. And I like the Red Wings to upset Tampa Bay in 7 games. In the Western Conference, I like the Stars to roll over the Wild in 5. I like the Blackhawks to semi-upset St. Louis, who is not traditionally a great playoff team, in 7 games. I like Anaheim to beat Nashville in 6. And I like the LA Kings to beat San Jose in 6 games as well. There we go, folks. Thank you for tuning in to Episode 1, the April 11th edition of the Bridgewater's Finest 2016 NHL Playoffs podcast. Just a reminder to join the NHL.com Bracket Challenge. The information is in the description to this video. I'm Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, and we'll see you tomorrow.